tactical wizards with tactical unique spells making their way through a series of tactical puzzle-like missions in which important stuff is at stake. Missions that are first, second, and third very extremely fun to play. Welcome to another episode of Yo Old Gamer Recommends. Yeah, I know that we are already in February, but I need to tell you about just one more game that came out in 2024 before that Yo Old Entertainment Game of the Year video. From now, let me ask you this question. Are you not entertained? Well, if the answer is no, allow me then to introduce you to Tactical Breach Wizards. Because oftentimes you don't know what to play, you don't know if that very popular game that everyone is talking about is going to tick the boxes of what you want to have in your game, or you simply don't have time and you want to narrow things down to games that you know you are 1000% going to enjoy. Whatever your reasons might be to doubt this or that game, know this: I am pretty confident that you are going to like this one. Of all the games that I've talked about here on the channel after Hades, this is probably a game that I can see everyone having a blast with. There are a couple of things that might turn you into a non-binary, as some of you guys say, so stay tuned till the end to find out what those things are. But we are going to start with the good stuff. The stuff that makes this game deserving of a Yo Old Gamer Recommends seal of approval. So in Tactical Breach Wizards, you control a ragtime band of wacky magic users who need to stop a war in the making, and in the process, find out why one of your party members' ex-companions is now leading the warmongers. It's a simple, straightforward, and mostly unpretentious premise that effectively provides all the missions that you'll have to go through in this game with story-driven stakes. And occasional plot-convenient bullshit justified with humor aside, I think it's pretty solid. None of the missions feel gratuitous or crammed into the game to fill gameplay time. They feel relevant to your overarching goal. And the game finds a way to make each act, because the game is structured in acts, and all of its missions feel progressively more intense and interesting, not just because of the enemies and the situations you encounter, but also because of the way it handles the crescendo of the story, which is a little bit bloated and muddied with unnecessary personal party banter that tries to be funny and often fails, but we'll get into that. But speaking of situations, there are all types of them, and they go from surviving X number of turns until you get rescued, to splitting into 2 or 3 groups with meanwhile types of scenarios, to we need to get the hell out of here, to 3 different factions battling each other in a single scenario types of situation. You name it. As for your party of wizards, it reminds me of your party of adventurers in Desperados 3. Each character has his or her own arsenal of unique moves, and all of them feel useful, very tactical, and super satisfying to use. Most characters have skills that can be used in tandem, but the true meat of the game lies in all the cross-character synergies that you can play around with. Banks, for example, has the Spectral Skull ability, which is a ricocheting flying magical skull that hits everything in its way. But she also has the Transcendent skill, which transfers all damage from the target of the skill onto another target. So if you're taking out 2 enemies with your Spectral Skull, but unfortunately one of your allies happens to be in the trajectory of the spell, you might as well cast Transference on him or her to transfer the damage over to another enemy who might not be in the trajectory of the Spectral Skull skill, thus taking out or seriously hurting several enemies in one go. You have Rion's Impaling Vine skill, which does moderate damage but pulls enemies in his direction. This skill is super satisfying to use to pull enemies into a free fall gap when Rion is on the opposite side. And you have Sand's Predictive Bolt skill, which works like a trap that hits like a truck and triggers when the enemy walks into it. It's perfect to prevent reinforcements from coming into the room. But the beauty of it all lies in combining skills from different characters. You can of course use Rion's Impaling Vine skill to pull enemies into Sand's Predictive Bolt to deal massive damage to an enemy. I do wish, however, there were more missions in which you could choose your companions, because the ones you do have are pretty fucking awesome. Also, your characters level up as you progress through the game, and that allows you to unlock some perks, which are essentially upgrades for your skills. And I love that these upgrades are very creative and tactical in nature. The vast majority of them aren't your typical lazy plus X amount of damage or plus Y amount of such and such. Upgrades modify skills in very interesting ways. Dal, for example, has the swap skill, which she can use to swap positions with an ally or an enemy, and the swap with objects upgrade allows her to swap positions with things. And these things include her own riot block, which she can place almost anywhere. And another perk allows her to swap places with things and people who aren't in the line of sight. So you can imagine how useful this is in a game that has movement point mechanics. Some upgrades can even add further cross-class synergies. Jen has the Chain Bolt skill, which can hit and knock back multiple enemies. And one of the upgrades is Conduit, a perk that refunds the action cost of the skill if one of the targets is an ally. So after you acquire this perk, you can use Bank's transference skill on an ally, and then use Jen's Chain Bolt to push several enemies to their deaths, and the ally affected by transference against the wall, and have the damage transferred over to an enemy that is perhaps not reachable by Chain Bolt, or simply not worth chaining because pushing him away wouldn't do anything useful. But all of these super satisfying skills and their upgrades wouldn't amount to much if the game didn't challenge you to make the most out of them. And I am happy to report that Tactical Breach Wizard does a pretty good job with this too. Enemy variety is perfect. There are enemies that cast force field on other enemies, enemies who shoot at you every time one of their allies takes damage. Some enemies have AoE attacks, damage over time attacks, immunity to push, etc. Also, the game makes sure to throw a healthy, steady cast of bad guys with new skills at just the right pace, so the gameplay never feels sameish or overwhelming. Also, the various locations in which the game takes place are cleverly designed to challenge your tactical skills in interesting ways. There are gaps that you can fall or make your enemies fall into, there are gun turrets that hit like a truck, there are skills that block your magic, exploding traps, poison clouds, you name it. But the game always stays on the normie-friendly side of things, which I am sure a lot of people will appreciate. There are different difficulty levels, and the game is on the easy side, even in the hardest one. I strongly recommend that you play it on hard from the get-go. I played it on normal, and then I played it again on hard for the video, and I found it to be easier. Some personal missions that I didn't complete the first time around, I was totally nailing the second time, and I was cutting through the missions even faster than I did the first time. It's not because the game is easier in normal than it is in hard, of course, but because the experience you gather from playing the game in normal far outweighs the increase in difficulty. But then there are effective and efficient ways to do things in this game. If you reckon yourself a tactical mastermind, you are probably going to set your own goals, like finishing the game in fewer turns or without anyone ever getting hurt. I admit that one of my favorite features in the game is also the pussiest one, and that is the rewind function. Yes, tired of getting that game over screen because you forgot that one of the 5 enemies you were dealing with had a skill that only triggers every other turn, and only when it's Sunday in the morning, and only when you're in an odd floor on a mission where there are flower pots on top of green tables? Cause I sure as fuck am. That's how I lost 90% of my runs in fight in tight spaces. But I am happy to report, dear viewer, that you will put those days behind you the minute you start playing Tactical Breach Wizards, because you can undo not 1, not 2, but all of the decisions you've made during a turn. Fight in tight spaces is also a tactical game, a lot more complex, a lot more challenging, a lot less forgiving, a lot more for Ryus who don't stick around for the celebration because they are already seeking the next tactical challenge. To give you an idea of how things are in Fight in Tight Spaces, I'll tell you this. Even in my best runs in Fight in Tight Spaces, when I had reached the nirvana of top concentration and patience, even when I was paying attention to every tiny detail and having a perfect run, taking no damage, nailing every extra mission, and taking the best decision every time I got a card reward screen, there would still be this one skill on this one guy that I didn't account for that would get me one-shotted into oblivion. One bad decision was often all it took for it to be game over for me in Fight in Tight Spaces. And the game does have many difficulty levels, and some of those have the rollback feature, which works a little bit like the rewind feature in Tactical Breach Wizards. But the game makes sure to let you know that you're an amateur pussy bitch incapable of playing the game like a man, because this option is only available in the pussy-ass bitch difficulty levels. Tactical Breach Wizards has this feature in all difficulty levels. It's part of the game's mechanics. Is it handholdy? Yes. Is it there as a soy-infused mechanic to minimize the likelihood of failure? Yes. But I still fucking love it. This feature made the game fun and never tiring all the way through from beginning to end, and it didn't totally rob me of the feeling of accomplishment. I occasionally felt rather proud of acing some of the encounters much more efficiently than the character's specific goals expected me to. And I don't want to end the dick-sucking segment of this video without saying that the final stretch of the game is absolutely fantastic gameplay-wise. Story-wise, it could have ended so badly that I probably would have made a rant video instead of a recommendation one. But the devs were wise enough to give you a choice to escape the inevitable cliche of pardoning the villain in the end and hearing how being a victim of this and that forced her hand to do what she did or whatever. Over the course of the game, you get to make some choices during some of the dialogue sequences, and none of them had any real impact. So much so in fact that you can skip all of them, but the final decision you make before the credits roll makes a huge difference. And that's something I wish I had in some other similar games. How much better do you think Desperados 3 would have been if you had been given some choices story-wise? Now let's talk about some of the stuff that I didn't like as much. In my opinion, doesn't have to be yours of course, this game is moderately contaminated with a post-2016 disease that has been infecting entertainment. The devs made sure to let us know that they are part of or an ally of the alphabet community. Almost every hard-ass decision-making character in the game is female, and almost every male is an incompetent comedic relief. This dude is presented as the poster boy of the game, and he's the first character you play, but this chick almost immediately takes the wheel and becomes the protagonist. There's some low-key lesbo teasing here and there, and of course the character that's meant to be the stoic, plate-wearing, strength-based tanky type is this chick. It reminds me of Valerie, Sela, and almost every plate-clad, gruff army boss girl that you have in Siege of Dragonspear. But to me, all of that is forgiven because you are given the choice of making everything right in the end. And you also have some pretty cool decisions during the end credits that give you agency over what happens with your party of adventurers once they win the day. So it's a feel-good game in the end despite everything. It is a little bit contaminated, but it's not trying to be mean or preachy. There are a few other things that I'm not crazy about in this game, and most of them have their roots in matters of philosophy. See, in Darkest Dungeon, you drag the consequences of your bad decisions for days. The game has several ways to remind you of that one time you fucked things up 3 dungeons ago. In fight in tight spaces, one wrong move can seriously hinder your chances of success in the long run, and it can even cut your journey short there and then. These games punish you for your bad decisions, but that's where the feeling of accomplishment comes from in these titles. That's what adds gravitas to the experience. It's part of the fun. The developers of Tactical Breach Wizards, on the other hand, seem to have been all hell-bent on sparing the player any type of frustration to a point where they almost removed the scenario of failure altogether. The rewind button, for example, as good as it is, could have been used to undo 1 or 2 bad decisions per encounter, or per mission even. But nope, you can't abuse the ever-living shit out of it with no consequences in all difficulty levels. And there are also no benefits to not abusing it. I think it would have been much more interesting if you have gotten extra XP or a bonus of some sort for not using Rewind, or at least for not abusing it as much. And if Rewind is not enough, you can even restart missions with no consequences. Oh yeah, and you go back to full health after every encounter. You have character-specific objectives, but completing them or failing to complete these objectives has no real consequence gameplay-wise. When you complete these character-specific objectives, you gain confidence points. But these confidence points can't be used to make your characters more powerful in any way. They are used to unlock outfits. So yeah, being good at the game only means you'll get the chance to look more fabulous sooner. See, in Mao Kenshi you have additional and alternative objectives, and the better you play the game, and the more of these objectives you complete, the sooner you'll have access to more and better skills, which means the game rewards you in a meaningful way for being good at the game. There are also a few non-mandatory missions and a few dream missions, but skipping them has no real consequence, beyond missing out on getting to know your character's background better. and completing them, or worse yet, completing them efficiently, yields no significant reward. You won't be missing out on anything important, and you won't be hindered in any way for skipping them. You also have this private investigator-ish section at the end of every act. In these sections you are supposed to connect events, people, and places with the information that you've learned from the dialogue over the course of the game. And if you have been paying attention to the story, you won't have too much trouble connecting these things. But what happens if you make the wrong connections? Well, you guessed it, nothing. You have to try again. But do you lose experience? No. Do you start the mission with some handicap, perhaps? Nope. Do you? Nope. Thankfully, this stupid minigame is less than 2% of the game, so I wouldn't say it hurts the fun factor. Also, your mileage may vary when it comes to the game's humor, but while I appreciate that the game didn't take itself too seriously, I think it tried too hard to be funny, and it seldom succeeded with me. I laughed out loud a couple of times, especially early on in the game, but some of the dialogue lines felt like they wouldn't be out of place in a stand-up comedy routine about the comedian's therapy sessions with his or her psychiatrist. Overall, I must have found 1 out of 4 of the so-called humorous remarks to be funny. And it's because all the characters come off as too cool for school and willing to make jokes when their lives are at stake. I especially detested that final item on mission summary screens. This was the game trying too hard to be funny. I did like the one about the broom though, that one was good. I do have to give props to the developers for almost always including a non-idiotic dialogue line that would cut all the teenage wise-assery dialogue short, or just straight out ignoring the other characters. You can also skip it without missing out on any of the important bits of the story. The story, like I said, is pretty solid, easy to follow, and unpretentious. It's good enough to make you feel like everything you do in the game matters. Overall, I would say this game has brilliant game mechanics, excellent pace, and quite a bit of replay value, since you can solve every tactical puzzle in multiple ways. There are extra objectives that you might want to complete the second time around, and a few difficulty levels to challenge yourself a bit. Yes, there is girl bossing and flag waving, and a bit of a bait and switch situation with this guy. But the fun factor is off the charts, and for $8.39, which is what it currently goes for in my region on Steam, with a 20% discount, it is a steal of a deal and thoroughly deserving of a Yo Old Gamer Recommends seal of approval. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. And share this video if you thought it was cool. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.